when everything is going to happen. So I'm sorry to be so vague. It's very frustrating giving advice when one is being so vague. Just so that you can get a little flavour of what's happened for EU migrants, is that the government eventually published its statement of intent on what's called the EU settlement scheme in June last year. They then published, I'm sure you know, the draft withdrawal agreement in November last year, and as it became a possibility, a creeping possibility, that no deal might be the reality of the situation, they then published a policy paper on the position of EU migrants, EU nationals already here, if there was a no-deal scenario, and that was not published until December last year. So talk about lastminute.com. Because as you all know, we're still meant to be leaving the EU, unless something's happened today, which I haven't looked at the news at all today, but if something happened today, please tell me. And on the assumption that it didn't, we're all due to leave the EU on the 29th of March. And if a deal is reached, there is meant to be a transitional period between the day after, the 30th of March 2019, and the 30th of June 2021. Now, nothing is certain. The EU settlement scheme was piloted with people working in the NHS and in academia. And it's a whole new rule, the EU settlement rule. Just so that you know the terminology, under British immigration law, people who can live here forever are called settled, or they have indefinite leave to remain. The terminology under EU law is permanent residence, and actually PR, permanent residence, is often used by many communities as meaning settled. So it's all a little bit confusing, but that's why it's called the EU settlement scheme. The pilot scheme has been in place. It's now open to everybody. You can now do it. And it's obviously meant to be fully operational by the 30th of March. The only difference between what happens now if you apply under the EU settlement scheme is that you have to pay a fee of £65, but you will get it back at a later stage. And if you applied under the pilot scheme some time ago, all of those people are due to get their 65 quid back too. What the policy paper from December 18 said is that if there was no deal, then still there would be an EU settlement scheme, but there would be it would have a shorter running time, and that all those who needed to make an application would have to make an application by the 29th, by December. Sorry, I've gone the wrong way. Press the wrong button. This slide just explains what I said earlier about the meaning of indefinite leave and settlement. Now, one of the big differences between the permanent residence scheme, which is what currently is in place for EU citizens under EEA law, is that EEA nationals are covered. So currently the withdrawal agreement doesn't cover the EEA EFTA countries. So there are a small number of people from smallish states who will not be covered by the EU settlement scheme. And if that's the case, then could you talk to me now, afterwards rather, today, because if you're one of those people and impacted by it, because you need to do something different and probably very rapidly. So if there is a deal, what an EU citizen will have to do is to make sure they are resident and living in the UK by the 31st of December 2020. That's the first date. And then make an application under the EU settlement scheme by the 30th of June 2021. So there's a 6 month after the first deadline, there's another 6 month deadline. But not everybody has to apply. Irish citizens don't have to apply, and people who have indefinite leave to enter or remain in the UK, so not under EU law, but under ordinary British immigration law, and there are quite a lot of people who do have indefinite leave already, they don't have to apply either. So those people are exempted from it. So what happens with the EU settlement scheme? Well, if you have been living and working here in the UK for 5 years continuously, you can apply for indefinite leave to remain or settlement. There are what are known as suitability requirements. This is a bit of terminology that is throughout immigration applications, UK immigration applications. So you have to be suitable to settle here. So no deportation order, no exclusion order, no removal decision, and no false or misleading information provided in the application or indeed in a previous application. You also have to have been resident here for a continuous period of 5 years. Now that doesn't mean to say that you've got to be planted here solidly for 5 years and you can never go out of beyond the border. But during the 5-year period, you shouldn't have a more than 6 months period outside the UK in any 12-month period. And if you've been outside for 12 months, then it's got to be for an important reason, such as maternity or something like that. So basically, if you've been here, you've been working here, and you've been based here, and you've really only taken shortish holidays away, you're going to be in there. Somebody else may need to think about their position. At the same time as the EU national making an application, they can also apply for their dependent family members. And family members are slightly different from family members under ordinary UK immigration law. It's more generous because traditionally EU migration has been more generous. So a family member is a spouse, a civil partner, or somebody who's in a durable relationship, living together, for example, had a child together. A child who's under the age of 21 of the EU national or their spouse or civil partner, a dependent child who's aged over 21, or their spouse and civil partner, who if they are dependent, and there are some provisions for other relatives to also be treated as family members. That is a little bit complicated, and I'm not going to go into details now, but if that impacts on you, I'll have a quick word with you afterwards, if that's okay, for speed. And these people will have to demonstrate that they are who they say they are, so an identity card or a passport. And if they are not EU themselves, they will definitely need a passport. And they either should demonstrate that the sponsor, if I can call them that, the main EU person, has got indefinite leave to remain, or has completed their 5 years of continuous residence. So they apply at the same time. And obviously, the 5 years is relevant for the family member as well, so they will need to demonstrate they've been here for 5 years. So if it's a child, you might want to get school reports, for example, or medical reports to show that that child has been here. If you're an EU national and you've not been here for 5 years, so you haven't clocked up the 5 years necessary for settlement, you can apply for something called pre-settlement. And as soon as you clock up the 5 years, you can then sort of upgrade to having settled EU settlement status. It's also possible that you can apply if you've been here for less than 5 years, if the EU national starts to work in another EU country, but they have to have lived here for 3 years beforehand, and must be coming back here, must be coming home to the UK at least once a week. There's also provisions if the EU national person, the sponsor, retires or dies, or has to stop working for reasons of an industrial accident, for example, or health reasons. Now, if there is no deal, then the deadline is that the person will need to have been, the EU person will have to have been here by the 29th of March, when we fall off the cliff out of Europe. And there's a limited time to make the applications, the 31st of December 2020. I'm going to assume, because you're all here, that you are here, but if you're looking at people who have got, if you've got friends and colleagues who may be outside the UK or may have been outside the UK for a while, then it would be advisable for them to come back before then. You can still get your close family members that I've mentioned before to be able to come to the UK if they get here before we fall off the cliff with no deal. So that 29th of March date is really important. Obviously, if there's a child born overseas after that falling off the cliff date, then that doesn't matter, they can still be included. They've got to make their application before the 29th of March 2022, and family members such as spouses, future spouses and partners and other dependent relatives can still join an EU person with settled status here up to the end of December 2020, after which the much more onerous UK immigration laws will apply. So it's still hugely advantageous to try to get somebody here and taking advantage of EU law, even if we fall out with no deal. So it's still well worth doing it. It's not just that the process is easier, it's far less costly. The fees for making an application to sponsor a spouse to come to the UK, for example, are well over £1,000, and you have to keep on making applications, and the cost of making an indefinite leave application is well over £2,000. So it's far more advantageous to try to get somebody here under EU law if you possibly can. And we've still got a few days to do it. So the process is actually remarkably easy, and I sort of feel I ought to touch wood or something at this stage, because the Home Office has a very poor record of implementing online schemes and computerised schemes generally in immigration. But this one does appear to work. What you have to do, however, is have an Android phone which has certain capacity. This is when I have to start looking things up because I'm not technical enough to know it. But I do know that cheap Android phones don't work and your iPhones don't work. So it has to be an Android phone of a certain capacity. The application, you have to download an app from the Home Office and then make your application. When I've done it with people, it's taken about 20 minutes, and that's included things going wrong, like it not actually uploading the electrical data from the back of the passport straight away. But in all, it's taken about half an hour and probably shouldn't take that long at all. And again, the decision-making process was unbelievable. I mean, for the Home Office, truly unbelievably quick. It was 3 hours before a positive decision came back. But that was for somebody who was employed, so it was very easy to get that person's records because it's all done through your national insurance number. The pilot said it was going to take an average of 9 calendar days, a couple of weeks, to get a decision, but they've obviously improved things. What you get at the end of the line is not a physical document. You get an electronic document sent to you, and you should definitely print it and store it. Whatever we think about trees, you should definitely print it and store it, because this is the only thing you've got, and to prove it to potential employers, for example, you need this. There is a mechanism that anybody can use to go into the Home Office and check their status, and it's also possible for potential employers, with your permission, to go into their website to check if someone's got permission to work here. And this should do the trick. This particular online thing should do the trick. The downside of it is that because you don't get a piece of paper, or actually nowadays most people get a biometric residence card, or like a little credit card, the information about you should be available at the border, so there should be no problem coming into the UK, but you do have to keep the Home Office informed. So if you change address, you've got to tell them. So it's more of the keeping tabs on migrants that we've seen over the past decade and a half, but it's definitely here for EU migrants. So as I said, you need your national insurance number, and I'm hoping you all have one, because they then use that to see if you've been working. Self-employed is fine, employed is fine. It's also possible to get this status if, for example, you're self-sufficient, so you don't need to work. But the mechanism for proving that is obviously not going to be through your national insurance number, and you need to have you need to have other documents to prove it, and those documents have to be uploaded at an outsourced facility with a company called Sopra Steria. The Home Office is meant to contact you within 10 days to tell you if you need to do it, but they'll only take 10 documents. Because it's a free process, there's nothing to stop you reapplying if it goes pear-shaped and it doesn't work. You can still apply, provided you're within the time limits that I've mentioned. What you get is settled status. You can stay here forever. You can leave the UK for what they're saying is up to 5 years, and that is a difference from ordinary settled status, indefinite leave to remain, because normally departure from the UK for 2 years breaks your indefinite leave. But they're saying that it's going to be 5 years. That's still subject to parliamentary approval. Who knows what will happen with that? But just as with other settled people, if you have a child in the UK, after you've got this status, that child will be born British. If, however, you've only got the pre-settled status, not the settled status, you can stay in the UK for up to 5 years, but if you go abroad for more than 2 years, that breaks your settled status. You break your continuity. And then you would need to reapply all over again for pre-settled status. And after 5 years, you can apply for settled status. And what does it mean? It means you can work here, access the NHS and other social services and benefits and so on. You can study here, you can travel in and out of the UK. But you're not British. So you can't vote. And this is just an aside, but I have met an awful lot of very annoyed EU citizens over the last couple of years who have said, if only I had become British earlier, we might not be in this mess. So you may want to think about becoming British. And there are a lot of slides at the end about becoming British, but I don't think we'll have time to get onto that today unless you particularly want me to. Now, what happens if you're refused? Well, who knows, because there may be a right of appeal, or there may not be, but there certainly will be a right of administrative review. That is the way that decision making has gone in the Home Office in the last several years. That it's no longer taking a negative decision before an independent appellate authority, but it's taken to another decision maker within the Home Office at a slightly higher grade, and they can review. You can ask for a review if you think they've made a mistake on eligibility grounds. If you think they've made a mistake by granting you pre-settled status rather than settled status, and you can include additional evidence that wasn't before the initial decision maker. There's a fee of £80, but if you're successful, you get it back. I think that's all I'm going to say about demonstrating residence, because I've mentioned the easy way of doing it, which is through the national insurance records. But otherwise, it will be through other documents that, if you're self-employed, you will have. But even if you're self-employed, you're going to have been paying tax and NI, so you should have those NI records. Now, I want to talk very, very, very rapidly about PR, permanent residence. That is, if I've got enough time to do so. I just need to check my clock to see if I'm not going over my 20 minutes. Can I, Chair, just talk very rapidly? Okay. This is the old scheme, which is still extant up to the 29th of March, and possibly longer if there's a further transitional period. Permanent residency means what it says, and it's automatically acquired. You don't have to apply for it, and you acquire it by having been in the UK and being in the UK as what's known as a qualified person. And a qualified person is a worker, a work seeker, a self-employed person, a student, or a person who is self-sufficient. And the only reason for applying for a document that acknowledges that you've got permanent residency in the past until Brexit was if you wanted to become British, because you needed to have a document certifying that you're British in order to apply for naturalisation. The other reason was if you wanted to give rights to third country nationals, so people who weren't EU nationals themselves but were your dependents, then it might have been a reason for doing it. If you want to become British, then unless you're married to a British citizen, you have to have lived in the UK with settled status. You have to have lived in the UK for 5 years, with the last of those years having had PR or settled status. So that is why some of you may want to apply for PR now, permanent residency now, which costs £65. You will not get that back, and is a lot more document heavy, and the process is not as swift. But that's the only reason for doing it. What I can't tell you is what's going to happen with the transitional period, so that if you get an application in before the 29th of March, but the Home Office don't make a decision on it for 6 months, which under EU law they could take up to 6 months for making a decision on that, what will happen to that application if by then we've trundled out of the EU with no deal? I suspect that they will honour it and that they will carry on issuing PR documents, and that could be very important for you if you want to become British. In your pack, in the slides, there is all the legals around it, so the legislative basis of the current position for PR. And the only difference to note is that EEA and EFTA country nationals are covered by PR, which, as I mentioned right at the beginning, EU settled status people are not. I'm going to skip a load of slides, which is there for just to help you if you're thinking about applying for PR. The next lot of slides are to do with how you become a qualified person and what your rights are as an EU national. Is that of interest to anybody here? Is anybody a new arrival, or can I skip over that? In that case, it's there if you need it, but I'm going to skip over it for time reasons. And I'm going to come to self-employed, because that's you. You have to provide proof that you're self-employed, so you have to have some form of economic activity. It has to be genuine and effective self-employment, and you do have to register as being self-employed and obviously pay tax and NI as a self-employed person. So you have to get registered with HMRC. And the Home Office expect to see those documents, those registration documents, when you're applying for PR. The other thing, apart from your registration with HMRC and your record of national insurance, which incidentally, it's very easy to get a record of the national insurance contributions paid. It's very easy to do that online. They also expect to see things like your accounts as a sole trader, or if you're trading as a company, your company accounts. If you're a sole trader, they'd expect to see invoices to see that you are still up and running as a self-employed person after the last set of accounts or your last tax return. I'm not going to deal with the self-sufficient or students unless, because I noticed there were some new student members. Are there any students here for whom it might be relevant? No? Okay, I won't bother to cover that or the comprehensive sickness insurance. I would like to cover family members because many of you will have family members. And the family members of EEA nationals are, as I mentioned earlier, a wider group than family members of British citizens or settled people here. So they're your spouse and civil partner. They are your direct descendants who are aged either 21 or of dependents of you or the applicant's spouse or civil partner. And they're also your direct relatives in the ascending line or in that of their spouse or civil partner. So it's both kids going down and parents going up. And the parents going up is crucial because it's incredibly difficult to sponsor elderly dependent parents to the UK outside these under ordinary UK immigration rules. Family members' rights of residence are also automatic. They don't stem from anything that the Home Office is giving, they stem from the Citizens Directive. They're automatic, but they're dependent on the EEA national continuing to reside here in the host national state as a qualified person, that QP. So in other words, of being self-employed, because that's what you all are. They could also, if they're EEA nationals themselves, be QPs themselves. They could be qualified. And they can apply for PR at the same time as the EEA national worker, provided they've been here for a continuous 5-year period. And once they acquire PR, then they are no longer dependent. So it doesn't matter if the relationship breaks down, if it's a spouse or CP, or if the child becomes independent and starts working, for example. Now there's also a concept under EU law, under EEA law, which is called extended family members. And these people do not have automatic rights of residence. Their right of residence have to be recognised by the Home Office, by UK Visas and Immigration, and they have to be issued with a family permit or a residence card. And they include unmarried partners in a durable relationship. The Home Office likes to think that a durable relationship is the same as an unmarried partner under British immigration law, but it isn't, because an unmarried partner is where there's been a cohabiting relationship akin to marriage for at least 2 years. A durable relationship, by its you play with words for a living, you can tell a durable relationship is looking to the future. It's looking at something that is going to be durable in the future. So it could be a relationship of very short duration, relatively short duration, but the couple may have had a baby, for example, and they're intending to live together. It also includes people who require personal care of the EEA national on serious health grounds, and again, that is much more liberal than British immigration rules. It includes relatives who are coming to the UK, and it also includes relatives who satisfy the requirements to get indefinite leave. And what they get is a 5-year permit as an extended family member, but they can lose it if they are absent from the UK for 2 years. Now, I think it's worth having gone through that just in case we get some sort of transitional extension of time, and we don't leave the EU on the 29th of March, which is why I've gone through that. And also because these family member issues are often the most tricky of dealing with problems. Just so you know, Irish nationals are not impacted by these changes because the Republic of Ireland remains a member of the Common Travel Area, and the Immigration Act 1971 does not impact on Irish nationals and doesn't impact on people coming to the UK from the Republic of Ireland. Irish nationals are treated as settled from the date they take up ordinary residence in the UK. And that means that there's no time limits attached to their stay. They don't have to, Irish nationals again, don't have to spend 5 years here working or being in self-employment because of the Common Travel Area, and they can apply this settled status quickly. And that's been confirmed in guidance which I've put on the slide. How you apply is not as easy as downloading an app. You apply using an application form, and there are different application forms depending on what basis you're applying. They're all available on the Home Office website, and they're also all available to complete online rather than apart from the family member who's applying separate from the original applicant, who has to download a paper application and make a paper application. Posted application. The process is £65 per applicant. You have to submit your passport. It's nowhere near as straightforward and easy as using this new EU settlement app. And it can take up to 6 months. It cannot take beyond 6 months because that's unlawful under EEA regulations. But what we found is that more straightforward PR applications where there has been we haven't had to argue about anything, that there's been a very easy proof that the person has continuous residence for 5 years, it's gone through really quickly in about 2 months, so it could be considerably quicker. There is a right of appeal for refusal, and there is an incredibly strict deadline for lodging the appeal of 14 days from the date the decision was sent. Not the date the decision was refused by the person, but the date that was received by the person, but by the date that the Home Office posts it out. And hitherto, because it's expensive to run an appeal, because there are long delays in getting an appeal before a tribunal, we've said probably better cut your losses, make a new application. It's only £65, but make it better. Make it a good application this time. Whether we would still say that once we have left the EU and once we know when there are what, if any transitional arrangements are going to be, I don't know. So, it's watch this space. We just don't know. I'm not going to go, the rest of my slides are naturalisation, and I don't propose to go through them because of the time factor, but I'm very happy to answer questions on naturalisation if anybody has them. Thank you.
Any questions?
Good evening. So, just a question. I have my nephew that became the citizen, British citizen. Is enough as the sponsor for recognize the passport?
So if you've got somebody who's already British, then they don't have a problem themselves. If they've got dual nationality, is that what your nephew has got? Has he kept his earlier nationality? Because it's not always possible, not every EU state permits dual nationality. But has your nephew kept the dual?
Because he's Italian and became a British citizen.
And who does he want to sponsor?
Sorry?
Who does he want to sponsor? Does he want to sponsor his partner, a child, his mum, or who?
For me.
It's for you, okay.
For me, sorry.
Right, okay.
For me, because I needed to ask the residence permanent.
Okay.
So could you hold the mic to your lips for the recording?
Is automatic?
That's fine.
Okay, sorry. And I read that I have to send the passport for the request, or have an sponsor that prove that my details.
Okay, what you're asking about is about an application to sponsor a family member, and if he is if he's an Italian citizen, there is a problem if he's already become British because of the fact that he's now dual.
Sorry, probably because he's Italian, but 2 months ago became a British British citizen.
Okay,
And
you're not working yourself here.
No, it's working.
You are working.
I'm working, yes.
So you don't need a sponsor.
I don't need a sponsor?
No.
Okay.
You don't need a sponsor. If you're working here, either self-employed or employed, and depending on how long you've been here, working or self-employed.
The next month is 5 years.
Perfect. You are a perfect example. Then in a month's time, once you've got 5 years, forget sponsorship, it's far more complicated than just doing it on your own right. So in the next month, when you've got 5 years and you can demonstrate that you've paid national insurance contributions for 5 full years, then you should download the Home Office app onto an Android phone that can take it. All these specification I've got here and can read out to you. If that helps, or you can look at it online. But you can then make this application that I've been talking about for EU settled status, and you don't need a sponsor.
Okay.
Perfect.
But about the passport, I have to send the original. I can
No,
scan
you
myself.
don't. You scan it. How it works is, I happen to have an Android that does actually work. We got them specially. We upgraded in order to be able to do this. All you have to do is download the app. You then take a photograph of yourself. You then scan your face, and then you take your passport. This is standing in as a passport. You scan the details page of the passport, the bit with your photo on it, and then, very mysteriously, you place your passport on top of your Android phone, and it somehow extrapolates electronic data from your passport, and then it sends you a little message saying it's done it. And then it sends you an email saying, tell us your national insurance number. So you plug in your national insurance number. It then says, okay, we've accepted the application, and you get a certificate of application coming to your email address. And it's, with luck, 3 hours later, you get another email saying, yes, you have EU settled status. Fantastic. It may take up to 9 or 10 days, but if you're straightforward, it took 3 hours, the last one that I did, with this very phone.
Okay, thank you.
I have an uncomfortable questions because many freelance have a very limited income, so it's possible that they didn't qualify to pay tax just because their income was too low. In that case, they can have that anyway. So is it linked on how much you have been earning? Because I read about a future rule about qualified professional that has to be an income of £30,000. That for a freelance is very, very difficult.
Right, the £30,000 comes from the usual Tier 2 migrant sponsorship, which used to be called the work permit. It's now known as Tier 2 general migrant status. And for work permits, you're quite right, there is an incredibly high income level and also qualification level. It's difficult getting a work permit in the UK, which is why everybody who can get in through either PR right now, permanent residency right now, or through EU settled status or EU pre-settled status, absolutely should do it, because they're going to be priced out of the market if they just try to rely on the ordinary UK immigration, which, as I say, it's slightly more complicated than that, because there are lower levels for people who've studied here, for example, but generally it's 30,000, it's going up to 35. So it's a very high salary level, and a lot of your people won't hit it. But they will have, so they may not have been eligible to pay tax, but they should have made a tax return, and they should have national insurance contributions as a self-employed person. And if they have, then they should be okay. Can I say I haven't done this yet for anybody with very low. It's really new. This whole scheme is new. And as I mentioned, the pilot was dealt with people who were working in the NHS, people who were working in academia, and that was easy. So we're now it's the rest of us, the rest of the world, and it is going to be more difficult, and we are going to have difficult people who have perhaps not earned very much, but provided they've been economically active here, and I did have a slide about what self-employment means on here, and provided that they have been economically active and that they have registered for tax, even if they don't have to pay any, registered for national insurance contributions, then they should be okay. If they're not, then my strong advice would be that they get an easy employed job. Because any old job, it doesn't matter, but because if they've got an employed job, even if it isn't doing what they want to do, and that I can understand is a tough decision for people to make if they're doing something they love, but if they need to secure their position here for the future, and their partner's position, and their kid's position, and their mum's position, all the rest of it, then it is worth the EU national getting a part-time job, paid, employed, paid job, which will then enable them to scoot into the pre-settled status and eventually settled status. I know that's not what people want to hear, but it's a problem-solving way of dealing with it, and it will work, and it means they're not going to be hit by having to have really high-level income if they become an employee under the Tier 2 scheme. There is another scheme for self-employed people, but that is known as being an entrepreneur, and that really doesn't suit your average journalist because you have to employ 2 people. So that's just not going to be you lot and your members. So really, I would urge your members to think very hard about becoming, if they are absolutely not hitting the self-employed rates and haven't been able to make contributions, for example, that they should consider getting another job. A part-time job. Part-time is fine. Part-time is absolutely fine. 12 hours, fine.
Are there any more questions? And for those of you who just come in and are still standing at the back, there are some seats over there if anyone wants to take a seat. No more questions?
Oh, hello. Thanks. That was very, very helpful. Just so that I'm clear, so the fee at the moment for, were you saying that the fee for applying for settled status will be refunded to people, but the one for what's called permanent residence won't be?
That's right.
Refunded. Right.
I think when they announced that, the government was it was having one of its many numerous great embarrassments about Brexit. So they said, don't worry, oh EU nationals who are in the UK, you won't have to pay even £65. So that, and furthermore, we'll refund it for all those who've been in the pilot programme, but not for PR, because they've been charging for PR for a long time.
I'm assuming anyone who did get permanent residence and then wanted to apply for naturalisation would still have to pay the full fees for.
Well, naturalisation everybody has to pay. Currently, I'm going to tell you, it's £1,330. To my total astonishment, it didn't go up. The fee increases have just been announced, and it didn't go up. I assumed that it would probably double because somebody's got to pay for Brexit, you know, so why not, you know, people who want to naturalise. So, but it didn't, so I was very cynical, wrongly cynical, but it's highly likely it will go up next, not this coming April 19, but April 20, so if you're going to do it, just get on with it and do it. Really, just get on with it.
Right, thanks.
Yes, hello there. I find the immigration laws to be very complex, very, very complex, lopsided, incomprehensible, unfathomable. You name it. Adjectives fail me now. The amount of adjectives I can bring into this. £65 is nothing compared to what we, from the Black Commonwealth, from places like the Caribbean where I'm from, and Africa, I have to put in the sort of monies that they're asking. I really don't understand the logic why people, my generation, my parents came over, the Windrush generation, to build this country. We've made a very meaningful contribution, and we've been treated like nothing. And the EU folks, I can only assume, as the old saying goes, my mom used to say, birds of a feather flock together, because you guys are all Europeans. So maybe that's the reason why I find the Europeans are having one of the Europeans, England's Europe as well. I mean, mainland Europe, people from mainland Europe, this is island Europe, mainland Europe, are having it much easier. They do not have to encounter the complexities and the difficulties we folks from the Commonwealth have to. The other thing, what I want to ask is a question. There's about 9 islands in the Caribbean that's part of the EU. Departments of France and also colonies of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. I've come across a lot of people who's having difficulties in this country. Some time ago, I took it upon myself to set up, I just want to stray from the point, I was trying to set up an immigration forum for people of African and Caribbean origin in this country. Now, I've approached the OISC, I've approached many bodies. And those people, whenever you approach them, it's almost like they read the Royal Act to me. I have tried, I have bent over backwards, I've been there, I've written to them, and I'm trying to set up this forum to help, people from my part of the world, or of my ethnic origin. What advice would you be able to give me? I'm just straight away from, because you stress more on the European aspect of it. I'm looking at it from the Commonwealth aspect. What advice can you give me as to how I can go about setting up this group, which will help and enable my folks to get citizenship and settlement in this country?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I completely agree with you that the UK immigration system is absurdly complex and designed to keep people out, and totally at odds, actually, with EU law, which, as you will be aware, is designed to facilitate freedom of movement. And so British immigration law is extremely restrictive, and it is ridiculously overcomplicated. When I started out doing immigration law, which was about 30 odd years ago, the immigration rules were an A4 booklet of maybe 10 pages. They're now this thick, they're now a quarter of an inch thick, and the guidance, well, I wouldn't have a clue how big the guidance is, because there is so much guidance on every single topic. So it's incredibly difficult. But I'm not alone, and you're not alone in thinking it's complex, because the Law Commission is looking into it at this very moment. So there is to be a law, the government may not take any notice of what the Law Commission says, but the Law Commission is looking at simplifying the immigration rules generally. Can I just say, just as a point of, just because I'm not sure if everybody knows, it's not just Commonwealth citizens who are hit by the complex immigration rules. It's also it's the rest of the world. It's not just EU gets a better deal. The rest of the world is hit by complex immigration law. How you should go about doing it? Well, you do need to comply with OISC, that's the Office of the Immigration Services Commissioner's rules, and the reason for that is if you don't comply and start giving advice without getting properly regulated by them, it's a criminal offence. And there is a reason for it, which is that over many years there have been many immigration advisors, and to my shame, I'm a solicitor, there have been many immigration solicitors who've ripped off migrants in this country, shockingly, have given dreadful advice, taken loads of money for it. And the OISC was set up to deal with not just a perceived mischief, but a very real mischief. I don't know if it's been wholly successful, and OISC does prosecute people, so presumably not wholly successful, but that's the reason why. I'm very happy to talk to you afterwards, because it's a little bit specialist, and I don't know if everybody else would find it useful but I'm very happy to talk to you afterwards.
We have time for 2 quick questions if one of them.
I'm 61 years old, and this is my 4th career. So I've been an employee, I've been an entrepreneur, I've been hiring people, I've been a freelance, and now I'm doing this. I rely on the Home Office having the details of what I pay. But if they don't, the burden of keeping the documentation was never on me. So my question is, originally, when the scheme was introduced, it was said to Parliament that the burden of the proof to deny settled status was on the Home Office. Now, not only we need to apply to get our rights reduced, but we need to prove that we have documentation that we never had the burden to keep. So my question is, because we have time until the 31st of December of 2020 to apply, should I wait until somebody sues the government for this exact reason and not bother at all? Why should I apply? That's the first question.
Well, the first question is, why should you apply? And you must apply by the deadlines.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you will no longer be able to work here lawfully, either as an employed person or a self-employed person. So you must apply. But in terms of record keeping, if you have worked here and paid national insurance contributions, it's incredibly easy to get your record. It's not the Home Office, believe you me, it's not from the Home Office, it's from the national insurance contributions.
I'm
and it's very easy to
UKID,
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I'm registered with UKID. I registered my passport through the Post Office Service. That doesn't require an Android phone. You can do it with an iPhone, you can do it with whatever. you provide your driving license, your passport, your whatever, you have something called UK ID, which is the centralized
That's not the same
I
as
know,
what
but
I've been
through
talking
that-
about, and I really hope people don't get confused by that,
No.
because it's not the same.
Exactly. So my point is, I see my taxes through that system. Now the government has outsourced a completely different company to do the settled status. So how is the burden on me to prove that one piece of the government has the information and the other piece doesn't have the information, where I don't have the burden to keep it?
Well,
it's a documentary thing.
But all you need is your
Yeah.
national insurance number, which you will have,
I do
because
have.
everybody has
And
one.
I see online my contributions. The point is, I cannot prove it other than by printing out the screen that I see through UK ID, through my national insurance online.
But you don't need to prove it, because the clever little Android app will take your national insurance number and check your records. You're giving them authority to do that by making the application.
It goes to Newcastle for you.
It does.
Okay, you're trusting the system. I worked 30 years in IT.
Well, no, I'm not. I can assure you, I'm very cynical about
Yeah.
Home Office processes, because I've worked in this field for so long. I've
Yeah.
seen absolutely catastrophic computer problems within UK VI and its numerous predecessor, whatever they called themselves, because they keep every so often they've changed its name, but the problems remain the same. But I do think that this particular thing does work. And I'm saying that from experience.
Why do we need to apply before December then? December 2020?
If we crash out of Europe,
Yeah.
which is of course a possibility,
Yeah.
if we go with no deal, then after we've crashed out, there will be no further transitional
Yeah.
provisions, and if you're working here, you will not have permission to do so, which is why you need to apply before then. And
Sorry, before December.
Sorry, I think this is becoming a
Yeah.
discussion you might want to.
I'm very happy to talk about it.
We have time for very few.
We have time for very few questions. I see there's a hand up here, Larry and Francesca, and then Tim, and I ask you all to be very brief, please.
My question is really technical, and apologies if you've already covered it before I arrived,
No worries.
just in case. So, for those who can access an Android and very easy and quick application, app, sorry. So, is there any other? What's the best second option?
The second option is that the Home Office have thought of this, of course, and they have set up places that you can go to, and also for people who are not able to use this form of technology, and you can go and have help with doing that at one of their centres, where they say that they will have somebody there to assist and who will have the appropriate technology, and that's all available from. If you look online, in the Home Office online for information about assistance is there, and I did print that out in case anybody asked this very question. I can give you the
I think
the
it would be easy
data.
to just to be able to use it, to use the device, no?
It's very, yes, except that it's, you need probably a more expensive phone than just a cheapo Android. You need something that probably costs £160.
No, I've got an iPhone, that's why.
Oh, and if you've got an
I
iPhone,
thought they know when iPhone doesn't work.
no, and the iPhones, it doesn't work, apparently to do with Apple not being prepared to do it because they were concerned about the safety of data leaking, which, given it's Apple, is quite funny in any event. But that was apparently the reason why they didn't participate in this scheme.
Larry, very briefly.
I'll withdraw, go with Francesca.
Tim's waiting, and then Francesca.
Does the cancellation of Shamima Begum's citizenship mean that anybody with fewer than 4 British grandparents should fear that their citizenship might be withdrawn if in some way they offend the Home Secretary?
That's not a Brexit question, but I think it's a really good question. And yes, I think it's unlawful. I think what the government has done is unlawful to strip her of her citizenship. The dead child was British. Her previous dead children were British. And you cannot take somebody's citizenship away under international law if you leave them stateless, and Shamima Begum has been left stateless. It is unlawful. It's also actually a gross bit of electioneering, a leadership electioneering on the Home Secretary's part, because he knows that the only means of appealing this is to go through SIAC, which is the Special Immigration Appeals Commission. And SIAC takes months and months and months to process appeals. And it's also a secret process, so she will never know the evidence that's against her. It's a disgraceful bit. I mean, it makes you ashamed, once again, to be British. It's a disgraceful thing.
We have time for one more question only, Francesca.
Very quickly, do you suggest me to do it now or to wait until things might develop? First thing. Second, do you suggest me to do now the very simple app? Or, I mean, I would like to do it now, the app, and then the permanent residence. So may I combine the two things? And finally, do you think I should provide myself a private health service soon?
I'll deal with that one first of all. The comprehensive sickness insurance is a term of art in immigration law, and it relates to people who are students here and people who are self-sufficient. In order to be a qualified person, if you are a student or self-sufficient, you have to have comprehensive sickness insurance. There's a slide about it, but I haven't dealt with it because it's irrelevant if you're a worker, and all of you lot are workers,
No.
so you can forget about it. You can use the NHS.
Right.
Whether you should do it now or should apply for PR, it depends on, do you want to become British? If you want to become British, then you should apply for PR, but choose your 5 qualifying years very carefully. Choose them 1 year before making this application. So you really need 6 years here, so that you qualify and get a date where it's deemed that you became permanently resident a year ago, which means you can immediately apply for British citizenship. If you don't care about becoming British, then you may as well apply for EU settled status, because A, it's free, B, it's a hell of a lot quicker and it's less document heavy, and C, you probably can leave the country for longer. I mean, all of these for 5 years at a time, before losing your continuity of residence, rather than after 2 years. But whether you should do it now or wait, if you've already got 5 years and you don't really care about becoming British, then why not do it now? Because you may as well get it over and done with. And then you've got EU settled status.
And then can I apply for citizenship
In
afterwards?
a year's time, you would be eligible to apply for British citizenship. But if there's going to be another referendum, you might want to become British a little bit sooner than that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Alison.
You're welcome.
We now have 5 minutes while we take refreshments or sandwiches, and then we'll resume the part of the business.
Could I just say, having organised Alison, so to speak, I'll now walk out with Alison, and anyone who wants to ask her further questions, as she's been inviting, will find a spot to do that in.